Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into the ancient world's most aggressively booby-trapped bedrooms, Egyptian tombs, stone chambers filled with gold, curses, and the architectural equivalent of "please don't touch my stuff, ever, or you die." These weren't your average resting places, they were anxiety-inducing escape rooms built by people who really didn't want company after death. We're talking secret pressure plates, fake hallways, poison dust, collapsing ceilings, and enough ominous warnings to make your Ring camera file for retirement. All designed by people who thought the best afterlife insurance was a maze full of spike traps and a very sarcastic cat statue judging your every move. Before we descend into this ancient fever dream, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you enjoy falling asleep to tales of cursed real estate and ancient engineering fueled by divine paranoia. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from, and if you've ever accidentally triggered your own house alarm and immediately froze like a Victorian ghost. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan, and tuck your limbs in before they get cut off by an Egyptian trap. Let's pause for a second. What was it really like to build, loot, or accidentally sneeze near a pharaoh's final resting place? Were the pyramids full of actual death traps? Or was it all just ancient clickbait? Could you outwit a 40-year-old security system with nothing but your torch and sheer dumb luck? What does a curse actually feel like? A lifetime of bad Tinder dates? Constant sand in your everything? Congratulations. You've just woken up somewhere around 1320 BCE, on the edge of the Valley of the Kings. It's dark. It's hot. And somewhere nearby, a high priest is writing your name on a scroll with an expression that says, "You're about to make a terrible decision." The foreman wakes you before dawn, hands you a wooden shovel, and points toward a distant mound of sand. Congratulations, you're on tomb duty. You were hoping for a nice week, stacking grain by the Nile, but now you're heading for the shadowy world of stone cutting, ancient rumors, and co-workers who keep crossing themselves every time a black cat walks by. There's something uniquely humbling about being the first one on site, standing ankle-deep in cold desert sand while the sky glows that faint, slightly accusatory pre-sunrise blue. You look around and spot your fellow workers already gathered in various stages of despair. Some are stretching their backs, some are muttering little prayers to Osiris or whoever handles overtime in the afterlife, and one guy is just staring directly at the ground, as if willing himself to sink into it. Your supervisor, whose job description is 80% shouting, 20% pointing, claps his hands and reminds everyone to try not to get cursed today. No pressure. The day officially begins when the first cart of stone rolls up, pulled by two oxen who look like they're regretting every life choice that led to this moment. You take your place in line, shovel in hand, and feel a mixture of pride and deep, soul-chilling dread. After all, you're not just building a house. You're building a forever home for a guy who can afford an army of priests and enough gold trinkets to make the gods jealous. No one wants to be the person who accidentally chisels a smiley face onto the royal sarcophagus. Work starts slow. There's sand in your sandals, sand in your lunch, and, mysteriously, sand inside your sealed water jug. You wonder if sand itself is somehow plotting against you. And then you remember what happened to the last guy who said that out loud. Let's just say he now works in the unpaid plague management department. The early hours are spent hauling baskets of rubble out of the tunnel, each step accompanied by a chorus of groans and the distant sound of someone already singing the Bacchash blues. The sun hasn't even crested the horizon, but you're already sweating like you're being interrogated by a room full of disappointed ancestors. Occasionally, you steal a glance at the tomb's entrance, a dark hole framed by neat blocks of limestone, ominous enough to make even the bravest worker hesitate. It's like staring into the world's oldest open-plan basement, except instead of old paint cans and Christmas decorations, there are cobras, booby traps, and an entire team of priests who pop in unannounced to sprinkle everything with protective dust. You can't decide if the dust is sacred or just finely ground up sarcasm. As the sun climbs higher, you switch from shovel to chisel. The stone is stubborn and hot, and your only shade is the impressive shadow of the unfinished tomb itself. Your hands blister, your shoulders burn, and you wonder, just for a second, if it's too late to switch careers to Nile crocodile massage therapist. At least then you'd get hazard pay. Around midday, there's a break for water and bread, so tough you suspect it might be a prototype for the afterlife's building material. Someone tries to make a joke about the soft life of pyramid construction, but nobody laughs. Everyone is too busy counting their fingers to make sure none have been swapped for scorpion tails while they weren't looking. You overhear stories, of course. Every crew has that one guy who claims his cousin's neighbour's goat was cursed for looking at a mummy the wrong way. Another swears he saw a glowing cat disappear through a wall last week. You try to ignore the talk, but the tomb's cool, echoing chambers make every whisper feel like a warning written just for you. By sunset, you're coated in dust, tired in places you didn't know you could be tired, and you have a new appreciation for beds, bread, and jobs that don't involve possible supernatural retribution. As you trudge home under a sky painted with ancient stars, you realize, tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because in ancient Egypt, death may be eternal, but tomb duty is definitely shift work. Forget hard hats. Your uniform is a loincloth, a thick layer of sweat, and whatever protective amulet you can beg off your grandma. If you're really fancy, a reed hat keeps the sun off, but it does nothing against falling rocks or mummified mice. Clothing for the average ancient Egyptian worker is best described as breathable, assuming you consider barely there a valid category. First, the basics. The trusty linen loincloth, which is less garment and more suggestion. It's the ancient equivalent of showing up to work in your boxer shorts, except it's not casual Friday. And there's a good chance your boss is an angry priest. Linen was the fabric of choice, partly because cotton and wool were too warm for the desert, and partly because nothing says, I work in the sun all day, like wearing what amounts to a glorified kitchen towel. But why stop there? For extra protection, you might try wrapping a strip of old cloth around your head. Congratulations, you now have a sweatband that soaks up at least 4% of your actual sweat, and the rest simply pours into your eyes. Sunglasses haven't been invented yet, so you do the next best thing. Squint. You squint so much that after a few years of tomb duty, you have the permanent expression of someone who's just spotted a scorpion in their shoe. And you probably have. Footwear is an adventure. Some workers get simple sandals made of woven reeds or leather, which are perfect for protecting your soles from the hot sand, and also perfect for trapping sand so it never, ever leaves. Most days, you'll just take them off and accept that your feet are now part of the landscape. Stepping on a sharp pebble is basically a workplace hazard, and if you complain, someone will remind you, at least it wasn't an asp. And then there's jewelry, not for fashion, but for survival. Every worker with any sense wears at least one protective amulet, a tiny carved scarab, a little eye of Horus, or if you're really unlucky, a hastily moulded blob that looks more like a frog than a god. Your grandma swears this will protect you from curses, snakes, or if nothing else, from the evil eye of the foreman. Whether it works is anyone's guess, but you wouldn't dream of going to work without it. Superstition, after all, is the ancient world's version of workers' comp. On rare formal days, meaning the pharaoh is rumoured to be making an inspection, you might be ordered to slap on a second layer, a linen tunic, slightly less transparent, possibly only stained with yesterday's sweat. This is the closest you'll ever get to dressing up for the job, and it doesn't actually make you any safer. But at least it gives you an excuse to cover up your sunburns and, if you're lucky, a few of the more dramatic insect bites. No matter what you wear, it never stays clean. After an hour on site, you're coated in dust, limestone powder, and a fine sheen of panic sweat. The reed hat gets crushed, the loincloth sags, and your amulet gets tucked under your arm while you haul another basket of rock. The only constant is the sweat. It's so ever-present that you start to suspect your ancestors invented mummification just to get dry for once. When the wind kicks up, your outfit doubles as a makeshift dust mask. You tie whatever's left of your tunic over your nose and mouth and pretend it does anything at all. Spoiler, it doesn't. All it does is give you a fashionable, slightly suffocating look that says, "I'm ready for the afterlife, but let's make it quick." By the end of the shift, you've sweated through everything, lost your hat, and found a beetle somewhere it definitely shouldn't be. You trudge home with your loincloth clinging for dear life, and your amulet only slightly melted from the heat. Ancient Egyptian dress code. It's not about style, it's about survival, and hoping your grandma's frog amulet is working overtime. You stare at blueprints sketched on broken pottery. It's your job to help carve secret passages, dead-end hallways, and suspiciously large pits that everyone insists are for ventilation. You quickly realize the only thing more complicated than Egyptian engineering is figuring out which tunnel leads back to lunch. Let's start with the basics. The foreman points at the pottery shard, which looks like it's been used as a plate, a coaster, and maybe a toilet at some point, and rattles off a list of easy jobs. Today, he says, you're on false doors. Tomorrow, collapsing ceilings. By Friday, we'll need a few good men for the scorpion pit. You wonder if you should have taken your chances with the team building boats. At least with a boat. The worst that happens is you get wet. Not accidentally discover the world's first indoor freefall. Cutting a tomb isn't just digging a hole. It's a full-blown engineering nightmare disguised as a spiritual journey. The architects are obsessed with tricking would-be robbers, rival priests, and the occasional nosy cousin. "Let's make it look like there's treasure over here," one engineer mutters, carving hieroglyphs that say, "Definitely not a trap." Another one sketches a hallway that turns into a dead end, then a dead end that turns into a slightly more dead end. If you thought modern escape rooms were tricky, ancient Egypt's version comes with a real risk of being buried under 20 tons of symbolic regret. Each day is an exercise in confusion. The main burial chamber is guarded by a series of traps, puzzles, and passages. So narrow you have to sidestep through them like you're late for a yoga class. There's one hallway with a door at each end, except one isn't a door, just a painted wall. You walk into it once, and now everyone calls you Flat Nose. Another corridor leads nowhere except a pit filled with pointy sticks, sand, and your lingering sense of personal failure. Meanwhile, the ventilation system, which you originally assumed would be a hole in the roof, turns out to be an elaborate maze of shafts, slanted tunnels, and one extremely hopeful reed fan. The result? You spend half your shift breathing in ancient dust and the other half trying to explain to your supervisor that the breeze is just your co-worker sneezing somewhere 3 chambers away. Of course, all of this complexity isn't just for show. The pharaoh's tomb has to protect its treasures from looters, rival dynasties, and most terrifying of all, the pharaoh's own family, who will absolutely raid the place if they think he stashed a better necklace than Aunt Nebbit got. So you labor over decoy chambers filled with broken pottery and sternly worded curses. You help hide fake doors behind stacks of limestone, only to realize someone else is building a secret tunnel behind your fake door. The competition between engineers is fierce. Some take it personally if their trap is easier to solve than the neighbors, and there's always at least one overachiever who suggests adding crocodiles. By midday, your sense of direction is so scrambled you consider leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, except you know that'll just attract scarabs. You try to memorize which passage is safe by counting cracks in the wall, but by the afternoon you've counted 347 cracks, 19 handprints, and one extremely angry cat. The real challenge comes at the end of each day, when you try to find your way back to the exit. It's like the world's oldest office maze, except instead of cubicles, there are deadly pits and hieroglyphs that sometimes read, "Turn back now." You learn to follow the smell of onions and the distant sound of someone complaining about the sand in their armpit. Eventually, you emerge, covered in dust, sweat, and at least 2 minor curses. You're exhausted, but you've survived another day in the world's most over-engineered basement, a tomb so confusing, not even the pharaoh's ghost could find his way out without a detailed map and several lifetimes to spare. And just think, all this, so someone else can rest in peace for eternity. Must be nice. The pharaoh isn't just planning for the afterlife, he's planning to mess with future generations. Your supervisor gleefully explains pressure plates, swinging blades, and the classic rock that looks like a chair, but it's really a catapult. You're suddenly very aware that workers' compensation hasn't been invented yet. You'd think a tomb would be a simple affair. Dig a hole, hide some treasures, toss in a few prayers and call it a day. But no, in ancient Egypt, the concept of rest in peace really meant rest in peace. But make it interesting. The pharaoh's security budget is larger than the wheat surplus. And every architect here seems to have a personal vendetta against grave robbers, and, occasionally, against you, the humble worker who has to install all these death-defying contraptions. It starts with the pressure plate, which, in theory, is a clever slab that releases a heavy stone or triggers a bucket of sand to pour into an unsuspecting looter's shoes. In practice, it's also a hazard for anyone who forgets where the safe spots are marked. You learn quickly to step exactly where you're told, or you get to test the trap yourself, live and unsupervised. Nothing like a near miss with a swinging log to get your heart rate up before breakfast. And then there's the matter of swinging blades. Some architect, presumably after a long day inhaling limestone dust, decided that nothing says sacred resting place like blades that whip out of the darkness. Why? Because robbers deserve a challenge, and because nothing scares off your in-laws like the threat of sudden decapitation. You watch as the master stonemason demonstrates the blade's mechanics, a complicated setup involving ropes, pulleys, and the kind of knots that would impress even the most skeptical sailor. If you're lucky, the blade is dull. If you're not, well, you've just learned an important lesson about not touching things in ancient tombs. But the creativity doesn't stop there. The classic chair that's really a catapult is a hit with the prankster crowd. Picture this. A weary tomb raider sits down for a breather, only to be launched headfirst into the nearest wall. As you help install the contraption, your co-worker jokes, "It's just a new form of ancient public transportation." You both laugh, but quietly, in case the foreman is listening and gets ideas for your next lunch break. Other traps are more subtle. Fake floors that collapse into sand pits, jars of poisonous snakes, artfully arranged behind secret panels, and even walls that slide shut with the force of a cranky hippopotamus. No one knows exactly how the ancient engineers figured this stuff out. Some say they were inspired by the gods, others that they just spent too much time indoors during flood season. You suspect a combination of boredom and the irresistible urge to say, "Bet you can't survive this, Tutankhamun." For every dangerous trap, there are 3 more that don't work quite as intended. The scorpion pit, for example, occasionally releases its contents too early, resulting in an unexpected, panicked scramble during the workday. The glue trap never quite sets in the dry desert air, leaving more workers with sticky toes than actual robbers ensnared. And the infamous rolling boulder often gets stuck on a conveniently placed pebble, causing more embarrassment than terror. But despite the hazards and the occasional slapstick failure, these booby traps do their job. They keep the tomb safe from sticky, fingered intruders and nosy neighbors. At least, in theory. In reality, you suspect the real reason for all this over-the-top engineering is that pharaohs, like everyone else, just want to be remembered for something unique. What's the point of immortality if your afterlife party isn't legendary? As you finish up the day, ducking beneath suspiciously low-hanging stones and checking the floor twice before stepping, you realize you've become part of history's most complicated security system, and all for the low, low price of daily existential dread and the very real risk of being outsmarted by a rock disguised as a chair. Sleep well tonight, knowing you've helped make ancient Egypt just a little bit more exciting for everyone except the robbers. Every day, a small squad of priests roams the site chanting, sprinkling sand, and double-checking the curse inventory. They warn you about great misfortune if you touch the wrong rock, but somehow never help move the actual rocks. It's like working alongside a supernatural HR department, one that takes their job extremely seriously, except when it comes to lifting, carrying, or even holding a door open for someone with their arms full of mummy linen. The priests float in, resplendent in perfectly pressed linen, smelling faintly of incense and something you suspect might be smugness. They nod gravely, peer at your chisels, and then launch into long, dramatic monologues about disturbing the balance, or awaking the slumbering crocodile spirit of Upper Egypt. Meanwhile, you're just hoping someone finally refills the communal water jug. Their main job, as far as you can tell, is to keep the curses well stocked and the paranoia levels high. Each morning, the head priest does a site inspection, which mostly consists of walking in slow circles, whispering to the walls, and dramatically gasping every time someone drops a tool. "That's 3 bad omens before breakfast," he says, making a note on a scroll. You wonder if there's a quota, or if he's just improvising for job security. The priests are in charge of the curse inventory, which is somehow both extremely organized and incredibly vague. You watch as they unroll papyrus scrolls listing dozens of ancient maledictions, curses for grave robbers, curses for liars, curses for anyone who steals a pyramid-shaped paperweight. There's even a backup curse, in case the first curse runs out of magic. Occasionally, you'll see a junior priest nervously crossing off a curse that expired last season, and you start to question the whole system. Are curses seasonal? Do they need to be rotated, like crops? Sprinkling sand is a big part of the security routine. They sprinkle it over doorways, on fresh plaster, and sometimes directly on your lunch if you're not careful. This is ritual purification, they say, though you're starting to suspect it's just an ancient prank. Once, you caught a priest dusting the foreman's sandals with a pinch of sacred Nile silt. The foreman's luck promptly changed. He stubbed his toe twice and lost his favorite hat to a passing ibis. Coincidence? The priests smile but never answer directly. The chanting is constant. Some days, the low hum is calming, a soft background noise, like the world's most spiritual white noise machine. Other days, it's less meditative and more, did someone step on a goat? You try to match their rhythm while chiseling, but every time you get close, the priests switch tunes and add another verse about eternal doom. Of course, the priests take their roles as afterlife bouncers very seriously. They're always on the lookout for spiritual irregularities, mysterious drafts, cold spots, or the sudden appearance of a beetle in a sarcophagus. If anything strange happens, the priests are summoned. Their solution is always more chanting, more sand, and sometimes a quick prayer to whatever minor deity handles pest control. You once heard them negotiating with a mouse, promising safe passage to the next world if it would just stop chewing on the funerary masks. Whenever the conversation turns to traps, the priests claim they're above such mortal concerns. They assure everyone that their curses will deter thieves long after the stone blades rust away. You'd like to believe them, but you've seen enough tomb robbers with amulets of their own to know that even the supernatural has loopholes. By sunset, the priests drift away, leaving a faint trail of incense and existential dread. They remind everyone to respect the sanctity of the tomb and to never, under any circumstances, whistle near the sarcophagus. No one knows why. Maybe it's in the handbook. Maybe they're just keeping you on your toes. As you sweep out your corner and mentally count your remaining years, you realize, in ancient Egypt, security isn't just about locks and keys. It's about rituals, rumors, and the uneasy feeling that someone, somewhere, is making a list of your every mistake. Good luck sleeping tonight, with priests like these. Who needs booby traps? You spend your lunch break staring at walls covered in hieroglyphs. Some are shopping lists, but others are unsettling warnings. Whosoever disturbs this tomb will be devoured by crocodiles. You nervously check for crocodiles, even though you're in a desert. There's a certain talent required to ignore writing that might or might not seal your fate for eternity. But in ancient Egypt, lunch hour is spent exactly like this. Perched on a sun-warmed block of limestone, picking at bread so hard it could be used as a building material, and pretending you're definitely not reading a personal threat written in pharaoh-grade calligraphy. Some of the warnings are very creative. The scorpion who stings shall find you, and the sun will never rise again upon your head, which you try not to take personally, even if you woke up with a weird rash. Most of the time, you tell yourself the hieroglyphics are just for show. Surely no one actually expects a plague of frogs to crawl out of a crack in the wall if someone sneezes in the wrong direction. But after a long shift chiseling next to, "Let all thieves be cursed until their beards fall off," you start feeling a bit itchy and wonder if maybe, just maybe, it's safer to eat your lunch a little farther from the wall today. You begin to notice a strange pattern. The most terrifying warnings are always painted in the boldest colours and carved the deepest into the stone, as if to make sure absolutely no one misses them. Some are so dramatic you suspect the scribe was paid by the level of psychological trauma induced. May your eyes turn to dust, your ears fill with the buzz of 10,000 flies, and your sandals never fit again. You try to laugh it off, but suddenly your own sandals are feeling a bit tight. It's not just the curses, either. Tucked between threats of doom and eternal dental problems are the mundane realities of tomb life. 2 baskets of onions, don't forget. More blue paint for Osiris, and remind the foreman, no whistling on Tuesdays. Sometimes you wonder if the warnings were just a way for the ancient workforce to keep things interesting. You imagine a bored scribe, stuck on night shift, carving "Beware the vengeance of the sacred cat" for the 5th time, and then doodling a tiny cat in the corner, just to see if anyone would notice. And people do notice. Your fellow workers have strong opinions about which curses to take seriously. One guy, who claims his uncle once tripped over a warning about unlucky elbows, refuses to lean against any wall at all, which makes for some awkward lunch conversations. Another insists the real danger comes from the silent hieroglyphs, blank patches of wall where something used to be written, but the message has long since faded. "If you can't read the curse," he whispers, "that's when it gets you." Sometimes a priest will wander by, see you squinting at the wall, and offer his unsolicited expertise. "Ah yes, this one means you'll be eaten by snakes if you steal the pharaoh's comb," he intones, waving a hand over a line of suspiciously snake-shaped symbols. You try to remember if you ever touched a comb on the job, then realize you haven't had a decent haircut since last flood season. But perhaps the most unsettling thing about cursed hieroglyphics is their stubborn, persistent presence. They're everywhere. Inside doorways, above lintels, even scribbled behind storage jars. No matter where you turn, you can't escape the feeling that someone, centuries ago, wanted you to be just a little bit nervous. Forever. So, you finish your break, brush the crumbs from your lap, and return to work. You resolve to pay no attention to the latest warning. Here lies misfortune, with a side of indigestion. But secretly, you chew your next bite a little slower. You keep your eyes on the chisel, ears peeled for the telltale hiss of a desert crocodile, just in case, and promise yourself you'll never complain about boring wall art again. In ancient Egypt, even lunch comes with a side of existential dread. People think it's all gold and jewels, but you spend most of your day hauling crates of onions, ancient board games, and enough jars of honey to supply a small army of bears. You start to wonder if the afterlife is just one long, confusing picnic. The myths are glamorous: golden masks, jewel-studded sarcophagi, the occasional giant ruby the size of a particularly smug pomegranate. But you, humble tomb labourer, know the truth. Pharaoh's final packing list looks a lot less like a pirate's loot and more like an emergency supply run for an especially needy roommate. Take today. You arrive on site, ready to move some precious artifacts. And instead, You're handed a sack of dried fish and told not to drop it because it's for eternity. No pressure. Every trip to the tomb storeroom is a new surprise. Some days it's a collection of sandals because you wouldn't want to haunt the afterlife barefoot, obviously. Other days it's baskets of lentils or a truly unreasonable quantity of figs. There's the occasional fancy chair, inlaid with ivory and just comfortable enough to remind you what you don't have at home. But mostly it's the essentials. Food, clothing, and enough perfume to disguise even the smelliest of mummified cats. And speaking of cats, don't get too attached to your furry friends. The Pharaoh's pets get the full VIP treatment. If His Majesty liked a particular hound or especially judgmental feline, you'd better believe there's a spot for them right next to the royal bed. One time, you found a tiny gilded sarcophagus meant just for a goose. No one could explain it, but the priests nodded sagely and said, "It was a very special goose." Of course, it's not just food and animals. Pharaoh needs entertainment for eternity. You spend one afternoon carrying in a collection of board games, complete with intricately carved playing pieces, instructions in elaborate hieroglyphs, and a warning that cheating in the afterlife brings bad luck for 7,000 years. There's music too, drums, flutes, and a harp that requires 4 people to move and has not been in tune since the last eclipse. He'll want to keep busy, says your supervisor, as if the afterlife is mostly downtime and snack breaks. Honey deserves a paragraph all to itself. The Egyptians believe honey is both food and a preservative, so the pharaoh gets a truly absurd amount of it. Row after row of ceramic jars, some the size of a small child, line the tomb walls. Some jars are already sticky to the touch, which means you spend the rest of your shift fending off wasps, ants, and at least one highly motivated lizard. If the pharaoh makes it to the afterlife and finds out he's out of honey, you suspect he'll be back. Sometimes you get to carry in real treasures, amulets, gold coins, jewelry with enough turquoise to supply a modest tourist trap. But even the valuables are often mixed in with more practical items, like 6 identical combs or a stash of backup eyeliner. You realize even royalty can't risk a bad hair day. Not even in eternity. There are weapons too, bows, arrows, ceremonial daggers, all laid out as if the afterlife is going to involve a lot of light hunting or maybe just scaring off nosy ghosts. And always, there are jars. Jars for grain, jars for wine, jars for mysterious substances the priests refuse to explain. At this point, you've carried so many jars that you're convinced the true purpose of the pyramids was ancient Egyptian Tupperware storage. After a week of this, you start to see a pattern. Pharaoh's tomb isn't a monument to endless wealth. It's a carefully curated afterlife starter pack. Snacks, games, pets, and enough changes of linen to ride out eternity in style. You have to admire the optimism. As you lug yet another crate of onions into the shimmering dark, you whisper a silent hope that, in your own afterlife, someone will remember to pack you something useful, like a pillow, or maybe just a fan. The afterlife, brought to you by practical magic, anxious list-making, and an army of very tired movers. You watch as the embalmers wrap the pharaoh, his pets, and, occasionally, a favourite chef. The process smells like a combination of incense, expired meat, and regret. It's half art project, half extreme sandwich-making competition. The process of mummification is advertised by the priests as a sacred science, but up close, it's more like an ancient Egyptian bake-off with a little more salt and a lot fewer aprons. First comes the purification. The body is gently washed in water from the Nile. Not just any water, special holy Nile water, which you suspect is exactly like regular Nile water but with slightly more ceremony and slightly fewer frogs. The embalmers chant as they go, their voices echoing in the stone chamber, as if trying to drown out the unmistakable aroma of last week's leftovers. Next, it's time for the removal of the squishy bits, which is as glamorous as it sounds. You do your best not to watch, but it's hard to look away when someone is poking around with a hook the length of your forearm. They pull out the brain through the nose, which is as horrifying to witness as it is to imagine. You make a mental note, never complain about a head cold again. The important organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, get their own little storage jars, lovingly painted with animal-headed gods. The heart stays in the chest, because you need it for the afterlife's big weigh-in. The rest is treated with natron, a type of salt that dries out the body faster than gossip in a village market. You're told it's crucial for preserving the essence. You think it's mostly crucial for clearing out your sinuses. After 40 days of salt spa treatment, the pharaoh emerges looking considerably more jerky than royalty. This is where the linen comes in. Endless, endless linen. You've never seen so much fabric in your life. You help haul in bolt after bolt, each strip carefully torn, sometimes with prayers, sometimes just with sheer exhaustion. The embalmers begin to wrap, layer by layer, working methodically from feet to head. Each finger gets a special bandage. Even the toes get little linen booties, in case the afterlife is cold. Every so often they tuck amulets, charms, and even written spells into the layers. You wonder if anyone's ever slipped in a "please help me win the lottery" note, just in case. Meanwhile, a priest circles the room, waving incense and muttering warnings about improper wrapping technique, leading to spiritual wardrobe malfunctions. Nobody wants to spend eternity with a draft. The pharaoh's favorite pets are next. The cat gets its own tiny sarcophagus, complete with painted whiskers. The sacred ibis, who once stole the royal fish dinner, is now destined for a spot near the feet. The favorite chef, who may or may not have volunteered for this honor, gets wrapped with a little extra care and a faint, lingering scent of onions. By now, the room smells like a perfumery crashed into a butcher shop. The final step is the resin, sticky, smoky, and guaranteed to glue your sandals to the floor if you're not careful. It seals the linen, adds another layer of eternal freshness, and makes sure the pharaoh won't fall apart at the first afterlife dance party. When the mummy is finally done, the embalmers step back to admire their work. It's a strangely moving sight, a lifetime of status, preserved in linen and resin, ready to face the gods. You try to ignore the itch at the back of your throat, the lingering smell of ancient onions, and the thought that tomorrow you might be helping wrap the royal accountant. In the end, mummification is equal parts science, magic, and stubborn optimism. The pharaoh's ready for eternity, and you're ready for a very long bath. If only the afterlife came with scented candles and a little less regret. As you help install a door that drops scorpions on intruders, you wonder if the pharaoh was trying to keep out robbers or just really hated future in-laws. Either way, the local wildlife is about to become legendary. Tomb security is a growth industry. The latest innovation, making sure anyone who wanders where they shouldn't gets a very personal introduction to Egypt's most ambitious scorpion population. You spend your afternoon delicately placing clay jars behind a false panel, the kind of jar that looks innocent until it shatters and releases 24 highly motivated desert scorpions. You're not sure who came up with this system, but you strongly suspect it was someone who lost a family board game night to an uncle named Seti. You'd think it would be enough to simply lock the door, but in ancient Egypt, that would be far too easy and far too boring. The pharaoh demands spectacle. It's not just about keeping thieves out, it's about sending a message. If you even think about touching my gold, you'll be dealing with something pointy, venomous, or just deeply unpleasant. There's a certain artistry to this. Your supervisor, never one to miss a dramatic moment, proudly demonstrates the secret lever that drops a small army of beetles onto the unwary. You wonder aloud if the pharaoh was more worried about robbers or just tired of relatives borrowing his best sandals without asking. Other booby traps are less dramatic but equally unnerving. One corridor leads to a pit full of snakes, at least that's the rumor. You haven't seen the snakes, but you have heard stories from the guys tasked with feeding them, who now walk with a pronounced limp and a new respect for "do not disturb" signs. Another passage supposedly fires a dart soaked in something described only as special sauce. You're not sure if that's poison or just last week's leftover stew, but either way, you avoid that hallway. Sometimes, the traps are so absurdly specific that you have to wonder who, exactly, was the intended target. The rolling barrel of angry geese, for example, exists purely because a priest once lost an argument to a particularly mean-spirited gander. There's even a rumor about a hidden chamber that, when entered by someone with improper intentions, releases a cloud of finely ground onions. Not deadly, but guaranteed to make you cry for the rest of the day, and possibly your next life, too. All this wildlife has to come from somewhere, and there's a small but dedicated team whose job it is to source and maintain the tomb's population of stinging, biting, or generally disagreeable creatures. You watch as a junior scribe gently ushers a line of ants through a tiny stone tunnel, while another guy delivers a weekly supply of crickets for the dart frog pit. Someone jokes that if this whole eternity thing doesn't work out, the tomb could double as a zoo. Of course, none of these defenses stop the truly determined. Tomb robbers, as you soon learn, are surprisingly resourceful. Word spreads of a guy named Neb who showed up to work with hands swollen like papyrus pillows, claiming he'd been testing the traps for weak points. He swears by his new amulet, made from a goat hoof and a lucky pebble, that he's now immune to all curses. You're pretty sure he's just immune to common sense. But for every would-be thief, there's a cousin, an in-law, or a neighbour who really just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The pharaoh's elaborate system of scorpions, geese, and onion powder is as much about keeping the family out as it is about keeping treasure safe. You imagine the afterlife. The pharaoh surrounded not by peace and quiet, but by the distant sound of someone yelling, "Who put all these scorpions here?" As you wipe the sweat from your brow and gently nudge a scorpion back into its jar, you realize that history will remember the pyramids for their grandeur, their mysteries, and, if you're lucky, the time someone's aunt got trapped in the very unlucky broom closet. In ancient Egypt, sometimes the best way to say "stay out" is with a whole lot of creatures that definitely don't belong in your picnic basket. If you think modern IKEA is confusing, wait until you wander the twisting corridors of a royal tomb. Some doors are painted on. Some hallways lead to nowhere but existential dread. You pray you remember which passage is safe, or at least has a breeze. It all starts innocently enough. Go fetch that basket of natron from the burial chamber. Sounds simple. You step into the cool gloom, torch flickering, and immediately the world turns into a choose-your-own adventure, where every choice is, oops, dead end. The Egyptians, determined to make afterlife real estate as exclusive as possible, designed their tombs to baffle, frustrate, and maybe secretly amuse anyone brave or foolish enough to enter. The corridors twist and double back. Rooms seem to exist for no other reason than to confuse. Every corner brings either the faint hope of an exit or another painting of Osiris staring at you like he knows you forgot your lunch again. Somewhere between the second false door and the third corridor that loops directly back to where you started, you begin to suspect that the tomb architects were either geniuses or just really bored. There's a hallway that gets smaller as you walk. Wide enough for two at the entrance, just wide enough for your ego by the end. Another path leads straight into a perfectly symmetrical chamber with 6 doors, 5 of which are just elaborate frescoes. You learn, very quickly, to knock before entering. Sometimes you find yourself apologizing to a painting of a scribe, just in case. But the best feature, the pride of the pyramid, are the false doors. To the untrained eye, they're masterpieces, carved, painted, and even inscribed with "Open for the Pharaoh only." To everyone else, they're just an early form of "Do Not Disturb" sign with a bonus existential crisis. You see a particularly inviting one, bright blue, with hieroglyphs promising eternal joy within. You push it, nothing happens. You push again, still nothing. The only thing you achieve is a faint cloud of ancient dust and a slightly bruised ego. The air inside these mazes is unpredictable. Some passages are cool and breezy, a relief after hours under the sun. Others are so still and stuffy, you wonder if you've wandered into someone's personal linen closet, possibly with the owner still inside. You develop a sixth sense for which way the air moves, a valuable survival skill that might be the difference between finding the exit and becoming the next part of the display. Getting lost isn't just for newcomers. Even seasoned workers keep a tally of how many times they've had to ask for directions, usually delivered as left at the statue, right at the cat, then ignore the next 3 doors. Of course, every cat statue looks exactly like every other cat statue, and most of the doors you're told to ignore look much safer than the ones you're supposed to use. Occasionally, you hear someone calling for help. "Hey, anybody seen the embalming room?" The answer every time, "Not since breakfast." The only thing more confusing than the tomb layout are the superstitions that spring up around it. There's a rumor that whistling in the corridors will get you permanently lost. Another says you'll only find your way out if you promise the god Anubis your best loaf of bread. You're not especially religious, but by the 4th wrong turn, you're promising offerings to anyone who will listen, including a beetle you find crawling across a cracked tile. By the time you finally stumble back into daylight, blinking and grateful, you've developed a deep respect for ancient Egyptian architecture and a deep mistrust of doors in general. You brush the dust from your knees, vow never to run errands alone again, and silently salute the builders. The tomb might be a resting place for royalty, but it's a full-time maze for everyone else. In ancient Egypt, even finding your way out was a heroic journey. The architects seemed to delight in inventing new ways to confuse, terrify, and occasionally flatten you. It's not a death trap, one insists. It's just challenging. You consider switching careers to bricklayer. Every day you show up to the work site, and every day the plans have gotten a little more, let's say, creative. The ancient Egyptian engineer is a rare breed, half mathematician, half artist, and at least 1/3 prankster. Armed with nothing but papyrus blueprints and an unhealthy relationship with right angles, these folks are responsible for turning the pharaoh's vision of eternal security into your daily dust-choked reality. Your first clue that something's off is the morning briefing. The lead architect gathers everyone around, gestures at a tablet etched with lines, numbers, and what might be a doodle of a particularly smug ibis, and declares, "Today, we build the decoy tunnel within the decoy tunnel." Someone asks, "Why?" The answer, "So the real tunnel feels special." You're not sure if this is religious wisdom or just boredom on a cosmic scale, but you nod along anyway. The best ideas are, of course, the ones that double as potential workplace accidents. There's a new sliding floor tile to keep robbers guessing, or more accurately, to keep workers guessing if their next step is onto solid ground or a one-way ride to the basement. Another favorite is the sudden drop ceiling, which is activated by, well, no one's entirely sure. Rumor is, last week's lunch break was interrupted by the world's first game of Dodge the Limestone Block. The winner got a half day off. The loser got a really memorable bump on the head. You quickly learn that every structural innovation comes with a trade-off. A hidden passage is great for confusing grave robbers, but less great when you're just trying to find the storeroom before your bread gets any harder. Some engineers pride themselves on the acoustics. One narrow hall whispers every sound from the burial chamber right back at you, so you can hear your own complaints echoing until you finally give up and join in. Another tunnel is curved, just so you never, ever see what's coming until it's too late. The thing is, you can't help but respect the sheer inventiveness on display. These are people who wake up in the morning and think, what if the wall was also a door, but only on Tuesdays? Or, let's make this staircase spiral. But halfway up, it turns into a ramp covered in sand. The blueprints are equal parts architecture and riddle. You sometimes catch the engineers giggling to themselves, and you know, with a cold certainty, that you are the punchline. Of course, the real stars of the operation are the problem solvers. When a plan calls for a 40-ton slab of granite to be lifted into place at a gentle angle, It's the engineers who figure out how to use ramps, levers, and teams of workers fueled by equal parts beer and stubbornness. When the pharaoh demands a hidden trapdoor under his sarcophagus, they nod, scribble a few notes, and 2 days later you're chiseling away at a secret compartment that will never see daylight again. You suspect some of the architects harbor a secret grudge against the rest of humanity, given the number of head-banging low ceilings and back-wrenching crawl spaces you encounter. There's one legendary engineer, Setka the Squatter, who designed a tomb entrance so short that every visitor for the next 1,000 years will be forced to bow or just accept a permanent lump. By sunset, you trudge home, covered in dust and bruises but grudgingly impressed. Because when it comes to keeping the pharaoh safe for eternity, nobody works harder or has more fun than the ancient Egyptian engineer. They might be equal parts MVP and sadist, but you have to admit, these pyramids aren't going to confuse, flatten, or trap unsuspecting tourists on their own. Someone's got to do it. Curses don't just happen, they're written, chanted, and sometimes edited for dramatic effect. You witness the scribes and priests arguing over whether eternal suffering sounds too harsh or not harsh enough. The reality of the ancient Egyptian curse scene is far less lightning bolt from the heavens and much more messy group project that's overdue. Picture a cramped storeroom lit by oil lamps, heavy with the scent of incense, nervous sweat, and recently spilled ink. Around a battered work table sit 2 high-ranking priests, 3 scribes, 1 terrified intern, and a scribe's cousin who's just observing for school credit. There's an ongoing debate over whether to include a warning about 10,000 beetles, or to go with the classic, your descendants will never find comfortable. Sandals. Every curse must meet the pharaoh's strict standards. He wants his tomb to be secure, sure, but also memorable. Something with flair. Something that would make a tomb robber pause and say, maybe I'll just steal from a different pyramid today. The lead scribe polishes his reed pen, sighs dramatically, and scratches out the phrase, pain everlasting, for being too generic. We're not monsters, he explains. We're artists. You watch as the team brainstorms new material. The head priest, who thinks of himself as the Shakespeare of supernatural threats, suggests, let all who enter be doomed to stub their toes on every rock for eternity. The room nods. That's a crowd pleaser. The intern suggests, how about boils on the nose, but is gently reminded that the nose market is already saturated. Someone proposes never-ending hiccups. It gets a laugh, but is ultimately deemed too whimsical for royalty. Once the wording is chosen, the real fun begins, the actual spellcasting. This involves chanting in Old Egyptian, waving around dried herbs, and occasionally trying to keep a straight face while your coworker mispronounces the name of a minor underworld god. The priests take turns reciting lines, carefully enunciating each syllable, as if the fate of the afterlife depends on perfect grammar. Meanwhile, the scribes hurry to inscribe the new curse onto clay tablets, stone doorframes, and even leftover lunch containers, just in case. It's not all gloom and doom sometimes, it's pure pageantry. One scribe, eager to impress, adds a few extra flourishes. A doodle of a jackal, a bonus line about bread forever turning to sand, and a signature flourish only he understands. The priests review every addition, occasionally stopping to debate whether wrath of the ibis is truly fearsome or just sort of feathery. By midday, the curse draft is passed to a committee of elder priests for final approval. There's a lot of muttering about back in my day, and nobody writes a proper plague anymore. And, of course, every curse needs a test audience. The junior intern is sent to read the new inscription out loud in the echoing burial corridor. The result, a gust of wind, an ominous flicker of torchlight, and the distant sound of a startled cat. That's a good sign, says the head priest, or a very bad one. Either way, we've got atmosphere. It turns out even curses need to be maintained. The curse inventory is checked weekly. Worn-off glyphs are repainted, faded threats are recited anew, and the odd misspelling is discreetly chiseled away before anyone notices. There's always some confusion over whether last month's boiling locust's curse applies to just robbers, or also the neighbour who's been eyeing the pharaoh's sandals. As the sun sets, the curse crew gathers to admire their handiwork. Threats of doom, eternal itches, and at least 3 warnings about crocodiles where crocodiles definitely do not belong. Their work won't stop a determined thief, but it might make him nervous enough to forget his lunch. In ancient Egypt, curses aren't just magic. They're the original fine print. And, if you listen closely, you'll hear the unpaid interns practicing their most dramatic "do not enter" voice, dreaming that maybe, one day, their warning will make the final wall. You find a dusty corner filled with the tools of would-be robbers, rusty blades, fraying ropes, and one sandal with suspicious bite marks. Apparently, OSHA compliance wasn't a big deal in the afterlife larceny trade. Tomb robbing, you quickly realize, is not a career path for anyone with common sense, strong knees, or even a mild aversion to cobwebs. The basic toolkit is less Ocean's 11 and more hope for the best. Most robbers arrive with high ambitions and low standards, armed with a rusty pickaxe that has already seen 3 generations of failure, and a rope so unreliable it's rumoured to be woven from the pharaoh's leftover laundry. There's always a candle stub, a dagger that's more decoration than danger, and, for reasons no one will explain, a hard-boiled egg. Tomb robbing is hungry work. There's no secret training, no criminal mastermind giving PowerPoint presentations on best practices for avoiding scorpions. Instead, you're left to improvise. Want to avoid traps? Test the floor with a long stick. Want to open a sealed door? Apply elbow grease and a generous amount of grunting. Sometimes the lockpick is actually just a bit of carved bone from someone's unlucky ancestor. The biggest tool in the kit is overconfidence. Your average tomb robber spends most of the job squinting at curse-inscribed walls and hoping that chanting, "I'm just here for the onions," will placate any lurking spirit. The toolkit might contain a handful of ancient charms, most of which are fake, blessed by someone's cousin who claims to know a priest. And always, there's a getaway plan, which boils down to run in a straight line and hope nothing chases you. Not exactly the blueprint of master thieves. Most of the equipment isn't even reliable. The torches sputter out just when you hear the first ominous creak. The ropes, often scavenged from riverboats, are so frayed that they double as hazard and equipment. Many a tomb robber has had their big moment of triumph end with a sudden drop, a loud crash, and a future in the mummy wrangling business. You see evidence everywhere. Snapped rope fibers, dropped tools, and once a single sandal in the middle of a sandpit. Its owner? Never seen again, at least not by daylight. And then there are the improvements. One enterprising soul tried attaching a goat's bladder to his pickaxe for enhanced grip. Another filled his satchel with dried figs, hoping to bribe any restless spirits or, failing that, snack his way through the stress. There's even a rumour of a group that tried using a small donkey as a lookout, but all the donkey did was eat the map and fall asleep in the passageway. Tomb robbing is a business that rewards creativity, but only if you survive to tell the story. You can tell a lot about a would-be thief by the state of his tools. The ones who show up with shiny blades and coiled new rope are either nobles slumming it for thrills or absolute beginners. The true professionals? Their gear looks like it was invented by disappointment, held together with hope and a few ancient cobwebs. These are the ones who make it in and out, sometimes with a trinket or two, but usually just with better stories and a few new bruises. If you're lucky, you never run into the really desperate ones. They come in after the other robbers, when the traps have already been tripped and the curse is read aloud. They don't bother with tools, they just dig with their hands, pockets stuffed with broken charms and old regrets. By the end of your shift, you realize tomb robbing isn't about gold or glory. It's about bad plans, worse tools, and the faint hope that whatever waits in the next chamber is less scary than the last. The only thing sharper than a tomb robber's blade? Their sense of denial. In ancient Egypt, even crime is an extreme sport, and the real treasure is surviving to limp away from the job. Thanks to a lost bet, you're stuck on the night shift. The air is thick, the shadows move, and you swear you hear someone whispering your name. Probably just your imagination, or maybe it's that cat again. You knew this was a bad idea the second you accepted the dare. It's not the kind of place you want to be after sunset. The tomb, so lively in the day with workers grumbling and foremen barking orders, now feels impossibly silent. Every drip of water echoes like a footstep. Every distant scuffle is either a mouse or, according to your nervous brain, the ghost of a disgruntled scribe coming to complain about poor handwriting. Your only company is a flickering oil lamp, a half-stale piece of bread, and the vague, haunting aroma of 1,000 years of incense, sweat, and preservation resin. The torchlight casts wild shadows across the hieroglyphs. Some of them look friendlier by day, but at night, every ibis-headed god seems to glare right through you. You keep expecting one to blink. Somewhere in the darkness, you hear a soft scraping. You tell yourself it's just a scarab beetle, or, worst-case scenario, a particularly ambitious rat. Still, you pull your linen a little tighter and make a silent promise. If you survive this night, you'll never laugh at the priest's curses again. Well, at least not out loud. The temperature drops as the hours drag on. Tombs are great at two things: trapping souls and trapping cold air. You shiver and think about all the stories the other workers told you before you came in. Tales of wandering spirits, restless mummies, and the time old Seti swore he saw his own grandmother's ghost doing inventory in the afterlife. You roll your eyes, then immediately wish you hadn't, just in case someone, or something, is watching. You try to get comfortable. The tomb floor is not designed for sleep. Your bed is a pile of woven reed mats stacked in the least drafty corner you could find. Every time you shift, it sounds like you're announcing your location to the supernatural. Here I am, perfectly edible. The only upside is that it's too dark to see the scorpions you're convinced are plotting beneath your blanket. You doze for a bit, waking up every time the lamp sputters or a particularly aggressive breeze whistles down the corridor. At some point, you're sure you hear singing, soft, distant, and completely out of tune. You try to convince yourself it's just the wind, but you've never heard the wind try to harmonize before. You promise Anubis half your wages if he'll just let you make it till sunrise with all your organs still inside your body. As the night wears on, your imagination gets bolder. You start having conversations with the statues. "Nice night, isn't it?" you whisper to a painted image of Bastet, the cat goddess. She offers no opinion, but you sense she's judging your choice of blanket. A passing shadow makes you jump, but it's only your own hand, waving in fear as you adjust the oil lamp. It's a humbling experience, part ancient meditation retreat, part existential comedy. Finally, just as you're certain the next noise will be the last thing you ever hear, the sky outside starts to lighten. The first rays of dawn push through the cracks, painting the tomb walls with a gentle glow. The chill fades, the shadows shrink, and you realize you've made it. Maybe the only ghosts here are the ones brought in by your own tired mind. As the day shift arrives, laughing at your haunted expression and suspiciously wide eyes, you hand over your lamp, straighten your back, and tell them, "Easy night." Nothing to report. But next time someone suggests a bet, you'll stick to something safer, like snake wrangling or swimming with crocodiles. Anything but another tomb sleepover. You quickly discover the tomb has more beetles than tourists. Scarabs crawl everywhere, judging your life choices. You learn to shake out your shoes, your tunic, and occasionally your hair. At first, you think it's just bad luck. One scarab here, another there, a third making off with a chunk of someone's lunch. But before long you realize this is their tomb, and you're just visiting. Scarabs are everywhere, in every possible size, shape, and color. Some are as tiny as a sesame seed, others look big enough to carry a message to the afterlife and back. There's even a rumor that one especially large beetle is running a side business transporting pebbles from one chamber to another. You don't ask questions. You just nod respectfully when you pass. Scarabs, to the Egyptians, are sacred. They symbolize rebirth, luck, and, if you ask the cleaning crew, excellent job security. The priests nod wisely when a line of beetles crosses the threshold. They say it's a blessing. Meanwhile, you're just hoping they're not planning a hostile takeover of your lunch bag. Every morning you develop a ritual. Shake out your sandals, pat down your blanket, and triple check that your water jug doesn't contain any extra protein. Sometimes you're successful. Sometimes you're just adding a little crunch to your day. There's a pecking order to the tomb's insect population. Ordinary ants and flies scuttle out of sight at the first sign of a broom, but the scarabs strut right through, completely unbothered. They have ancient VIP status. You see them painted on the walls, carved into amulets, even embedded in the occasional protective necklace handed out by grandma. The living ones seem to know their legacy. They act like they own the place, and in a way they do. Lunch breaks are never dull. You sit down, open your reed basket, and find a scarab politely inspecting your onion. You move it aside, and it calmly resumes its journey, as if to say, "You may be a tomb builder, but I am eternal." Once, you spot a particularly adventurous beetle hitching a ride on the foreman's headscarf. No one has the heart to point it out. He looks more confident with his new assistant. Occasionally, someone tries to fight back, maybe wave a sandal or toss a bit of incense in their path. This is a mistake. The scarabs only multiply. They take it as a challenge. Within minutes, the whole corner of the tomb is a roiling, clicking mass of beetles on a mysterious mission. No one wins against the scarabs. They're like the ancient version of office politics. Persistent, slightly mysterious, and always underfoot. The embalmers swear the scarabs help guard the sacred chambers, though you're fairly sure they're just after a snack. The priests, on the other hand, are convinced the beetles bring messages from the gods. One priest claims he can read fortunes in the way a scarab rolls its ball of dung. "This one means good luck," he announces, pointing at a particularly energetic beetle. You pretend to be impressed, mostly because you don't want to risk a beetle-based curse. Then there's the nightly invasion. By torchlight, the tomb walls seem to move. The scarabs get bolder, climbing up the sides, weaving through cracks, occasionally launching surprise attacks on exposed ankles. You tell yourself it's just a harmless pest. After all, they're sacred. But it's hard to feel philosophical at 3 a.m. with beetles doing laps around your toes. And yet, somehow, you get used to it. You learn to walk with a careful step, check your pillow before sleeping, and accept that sometimes the ancient gods send their blessings in the form of a small, slightly crunchy bug. Scarabs are the true eternal residents here. The pharaoh may have commissioned the tomb, but the beetles have signed a lifetime lease. As you dust off your tunic and prepare to face another day in beetle country, you can't help but feel a grudging respect for these tiny survivors. History remembers kings, but it's the scarabs who stick around, generation after generation, always ready to remind you who's really in charge. The tomb's aroma is a pungent mix of myrrh, mildew, and something dead. You try to breathe through your mouth, which only makes things worse. Some places just have a smell. The family home, your favorite bakery, that neighbor's hut who always burns the fish. But nothing, absolutely nothing, can prepare you for the scent that clings to the inside of a pharaoh's final resting place. You thought your job would come with perks, maybe a bit of extra bread, a chance to sneak a glimpse of gold. Instead, you get the full nasal experience of eternity in all its ancient, unwashed glory. There's incense, of course. Always incense. The priests burn it in small clay pots at every ceremony, wafting fragrant smoke through the corridors to honor the gods and purify the air. What it actually does is layer another, sweeter smell on top of everything else, sort of like dabbing perfume behind your ears when you haven't bathed since the last flood season. The myrrh is thick and sticky, clinging to your hair and your tunic. You find yourself catching a whiff of it days later, wondering if it's blessing or punishment. Beneath the incense, though, lurks something else. The faint, inescapable tang of mildew, a gentle reminder that, for all the careful stonework and clever drainage, tombs are underground. Where there's no sunlight, there's moisture, and where there's moisture, there's always something growing. Some corners are fuzzy, with mysterious green patches you try not to think about. The embalmers shrug and say, "It's natural." The priests mutter about protective spirits. You suspect it's just old-fashioned neglect, but you're not going to argue with anyone holding a jar of natron. And then there's the third layer, the essence of afterlife. Some call it the scent of immortality. You call it the reason you've learned to tie your headscarf over your nose. It's hard to describe. Not quite meat, not quite herbs, but definitely something that started living, stopped, and then stuck around for another century or three just to see what would happen next. You pass the sealed sarcophagus and get a noseful of what can only be described as ancient regret. Lunch breaks are especially exciting. You sit down, bite into your bread, and realize the taste is competing with the airborne flavor of eternal mummy. You take a sip of water, but the smell lingers, finding its way up your nostrils, into your mouth, and you're convinced, directly into your soul. Breathing through your mouth helps for a moment, until you realize that somehow this just spreads the flavors around. Your tongue joins your nose in protest. There's no winning here, just surviving. Every so often, a new odor joins the lineup. The day they moved the sacred pets in for mummification, the chamber was briefly overwhelmed by a wave of wet dog with undertones of disappointment. Another time, someone dropped a pot of spoiled honey in the entryway. The result, a uniquely revolting blend of sour sweetness that lingered long after the cleanup crew gave up. You tell yourself it's all part of the experience, an exclusive, never-to-be-repeated adventure for your senses. A scent tour, if you will, curated by the world's most ancient perfumers. It's not all bad. Sometimes the scent of cedarwood oil wafts in, promising a moment of calm and the faintest hope of fresh air. You close your eyes, pretend you're by the river, and then immediately open them again when a beetle lands on your arm. Reality bites, and usually it's musty. By the end of your shift, your nose has been so thoroughly assaulted that you barely notice the layers anymore. You stagger home, smelling like an incense factory that collided with a spice merchant and a taxidermy shop. The good news? You're now immune to everything except soap, if you can ever find some. In ancient Egypt, the smell of eternity isn't just a metaphor. It's the reason nobody volunteers for the night shift, and why even the gods probably prefer to visit outdoors. Nothing gets the adrenaline going like the sound of stones shifting overhead. You develop a keen ear for good rumble versus run now. Building a tomb is hard enough without the constant threat of sudden doom from above. In ancient Egypt, every day on the job is a delicate dance with gravity and fate, set to a soundtrack of distant, cracking, echoing groans and the unmistakable pop of limestone under stress. Your supervisor claims it builds character. You think it mostly builds calluses and the reflexes of a startled gazelle. Early on, you learn that not all rumbles are created equal. A good rumble is the low, steady vibration of 100 men hauling stone blocks into place. Good rumble means the wall is settling, the ceiling is sighing, and you're probably safe to keep chiseling, at least for the next 5 minutes. But then there's the other kind, the sudden, sharp crack that silences the room, makes every worker freeze, and sends the bravest soul backing slowly toward the exit. You've never seen a team of laborers move so fast as when the ceiling lets out that telltale warning groan. Every tool is dropped, every complaint about bread crusts forgotten, and suddenly everyone is a sprinter. Safety protocols are mostly unspoken. Step lightly, never whistle under a low arch, and if the foreman shouts "duck," don't bother asking why. Just hit the ground and pray. There's a reason nobody brags about job security in tomb building. One minute, you're carving the pharaoh's name in beautiful hieroglyphs. The next, you're dodging a shower of ancient dust and listening for the first pebbles, nature's cruel little warning system. Sometimes it's just a few chips of stone. Other times, it's a full section of the ceiling dropping like the world's slowest, heaviest curtain call. Congratulations, you've just been cast as Unfortunate Bystander 1. Insurance? That's what the priests are for. They parade through after every incident, waving incense, muttering about balancing the humours, and promising that the next chamber is much safer. "We blessed it twice," one says cheerfully, ignoring the new pile of rubble in the corner. "Blessings are nice, but you wish someone would invent a decent support beam." Support beams, in fact, are a constant subject of debate. The engineers love a clever corbel arch, but you swear half of them are held up by optimism, and the other half by a stack of wishful thinking. Some chambers get reinforced with cedar posts brought all the way from Lebanon, precious and expensive, but you'd hug them if it wasn't so undignified. Others just get extra careful stacking, which, based on recent history, means please don't sneeze too hard. Lunch breaks become a time to swap near-miss stories. Everyone has one. The guy who outran a rolling stone, the apprentice who ducked just in time, the foreman who claims he once caught a falling brick. No one believes him. The new workers laugh nervously. The old ones check for the nearest exit at all times. Of course, accidents happen. When they do, it's a combination of chaos and ancient Egyptian first aid. A slap on the back, a splash of water, and the advice to walk it off. You're not sure what's more hazardous, the collapsing ceiling or the treatment afterward. Yet, as the dust settles and the echo fades, work resumes. Someone sweeps up the debris, someone else checks the wall for fresh cracks, and you go right back to chiseling, heart pounding but determined. The tomb must be finished. And you're not about to let a little thing like mortal danger get in the way. By sunset, you're exhausted and covered in dust, but grateful you're still in one piece. In ancient Egypt, safety hazards come standard with every job. The trick isn't to avoid them entirely. That's impossible. The trick is to know when to run, when to duck, and when to pray the ceiling likes you just enough to hold on for one more day. You overhear the head scribe teaching guards a series of secret passwords, each more absurd than the last. It's less open sesame, and more, tell me what Pharaoh's cat was allergic to. This is how ancient security really works. Forget booby traps and swinging blades. True tomb protection relies on a system of code words so complicated that even the guards need a cheat sheet. In theory, it's a simple way to keep out the riffraff. In practice, it's a daily comedy show starring nervous guards, tired scribes, and the occasional baffled cousin who just wanted to borrow a jar of honey. The passwords change constantly because you never know when a tomb robber might be listening. Monday's entry code might be, "The Nile rises in the dark," and Tuesday's could be, "May the ibis never molt." By Wednesday, the phrase is, "The left sandal is blessed, but the right one squeaks." Try saying that with a straight face at the end of a 12-hour shift. One poor guard mixes up his words and nearly gets locked in with the mummified pets. He spends the rest of the day being followed by suspiciously attentive cats. You quickly realize the real point isn't just secrecy, it's confusion. The more ridiculous the code, the less likely anyone is to guess it by accident. You've heard rumors that one set of passwords required the guard to recite the full list of Pharaoh's favorite fruits in reverse order, while hopping on one foot and balancing a reed basket. Even the Pharaoh would have had trouble getting through the front door without assistance. The head scribe is in charge of inventing these gems, and he treats it like an art form. You watch him labor over each new phrase, brow furrowed, reed pen tapping against his teeth. "Too obvious," he mutters, scratching out. "Osiris is wise." "Too long," as he dismisses. "I once saw a hippopotamus eat 3 baskets of figs before breakfast." What he settles on is always just confusing enough to make you wonder if you're part of a joke, which, let's be honest, you probably are. Training the guards is a whole separate ordeal. Every morning, a handful of groggy sentries gather at the scribe's bench, repeating the day's code like a bunch of school children rehearsing for a play they never auditioned for. Some take it seriously, mouthing the words in solemn concentration. Others can barely hide their amusement. There's always one guy who tries to sneak in the previous week's password, only to be sent back to practice with the junior scribes. It's a matter of pride not to get caught. And of course, there are backup codes. If you forget the main password, there's always a riddle, a gesture, or, if you're truly desperate, the secret handshake that looks suspiciously like you're shooing a fly. No one remembers exactly who invented the handshake, but it's been passed down for generations. You suspect it started as a prank, but at this point, tradition is tradition. Some passwords are inspired by real events. After the infamous incident of the pharaoh's allergic reaction to bee pollen, there's a whole week's worth of codes based on sneezy royalty. Guards are expected to respond to, "The bee is in the bonnet," with, "But the bonnet is safe." No one outside the tomb staff has any idea what's going on, and honestly, most of the staff are just guessing. You start to notice that even the most hardened thieves give up when confronted with the guard at the entrance. Not because he's intimidating, but because, after 10 minutes of listening to him and the doorkeeper debate whether honeyed onions was yesterday's or tomorrow's password, they decide the loot just isn't worth it. By the time you've heard a month's worth of passwords, you start to wonder if the real secret to ancient Egyptian security is simple: keep everyone just confused enough to give up. In the end, the tomb survives another day. Not because of its walls, its curses, or even its traps, but because nobody can remember whether the current code word is sacred goose or 2 jars of pickled radish. And that, in its own way, might just be the cleverest security system of all. You accidentally brush against a wall and trigger a spectacular dust-filled chain reaction. You survive, but the clean-up detail lasts for days and everyone calls you lucky from now on, never with affection. It's just another ordinary day, hauling limestone and wishing for a longer lunch break, when your elbow betrays you. The moment your sleeve makes contact with the suspiciously clean patch of wall, there's a faint click, a pause, and then chaos. Stones start shifting overhead. A cloud of ancient dust erupts from a crack. And somewhere, in the deep distance, you swear you hear a priest mumble, "Not again." For a split second you freeze, heart pounding, lungs filling with the unique flavor of panic and powdered mummy. Then comes the chain reaction. A rope unspools from the ceiling, triggering a loose slab to drop just close enough to your toes to make you reconsider every career choice you've ever made. You stumble backward, bump another panel, and unleash a fresh avalanche of sand, beetles, and something that might have once been part of the lunchroom. Other workers scatter in all directions, arms waving, curses flying, each trying to look busy anywhere but near you. The supervisor appears in a cloud of dust, eyes wild, already preparing his "this is why we can't have nice things" speech. You don't even bother defending yourself. It's impossible to argue with a beard full of cobwebs and a reputation for attracting disaster. The next few hours are spent in a blur of frantic sweeping, apologizing, and trying to convince the priest that no, you didn't anger the spirits on purpose. You become intimately familiar with every broom in the tomb. Every so often, a co-worker walks by, shakes his head, and mutters, "Lucky," with the tone of someone who means the exact opposite. Your life as lucky quickly develops its own set of rituals. Lunch breaks are now solo affairs. No one wants to sit too close in case you set off a booby-trapped bread basket. At the end of every shift, you're asked to double-check your pockets for spare amulets, unlucky charms, or anything else that might trigger another round of ancient security systems gone wild. The worst part? The cleanup detail never seems to end. You find dust in places dust was never meant to go. There are new cracks in the floor, mysterious puddles of honey by the west wall, and an unexplained surplus of scarab beetles. One chamber, previously known as storage, is now the pit, a place no one visits unless absolutely necessary. The only thing that survived the disaster completely unscathed is the priest's supply of curse scrolls, which he assures you are now on high alert. And then there's the teasing. Oh, the teasing. Someone leaves a tiny replica of a swinging blade on your sleeping mat. Your water jug mysteriously fills itself with sand. Every time you walk past a group of workers, you catch the tail end of a new story. And then Lucky tried to clean the hieroglyphs with his elbow. Boom. 7 hours of sweeping. You try to laugh along. What else can you do? In ancient Egypt, a little embarrassment beats being turned into a cautionary tale, or worse, actual mummy bait. But in the quiet moments, sweeping yet another pile of rubble, listening to the distant clank of engineers resetting the traps, you start to appreciate your new role. You're living proof that you can survive the worst the tomb has to offer, as long as you duck fast and never underestimate the power of a misplaced elbow. Besides, you've learned where all the traps are now, sometimes the hard way, but that's still learning. By the time the dust finally settles, both literally and metaphorically, you realize that Lucky isn't such a bad nickname. After all, you're still in one piece, which is more than you can say for half the vases in the Western Hall. And next time someone asks for a volunteer to dust the walls, you just shake your head, smile, and suggest they ask the new guy. Every so often, the guards drag in some hapless looter. After a stern warning, and maybe a light cursing, they're sent off minus a few valuables and sometimes minus their pants. The scene is almost routine by now. A scuffle at the tomb entrance, a raised voice, and a brief but frantic chase down a corridor lined with angry cat gods. The guards, resplendent in their linen tunics and extremely serious expressions, haul in the would-be thief. The loot? Usually nothing more glamorous than a chipped amulet or a sticky handful of honey. Occasionally, someone gets ambitious and tries for a decorative comb or a piece of bread they swear was left as an offering. You're not convinced it looks suspiciously like last week's leftovers. The punishment is part performance, part practical lesson for the rest of the workers. The guards, clearly relishing their role as protectors of the pharaoh's dignity, make a big show of the apprehension. There's a dramatic reading of the nearest curse, a couple of stern looks, and, for added effect, a minor priest muttering in the background while waving a stick of incense like he's dusting the furniture. The looter is marched up and down the main hallway, pants now inconveniently missing, while everyone else pretends to look away and absolutely does not snicker. Much. Once the thief is thoroughly embarrassed, the guards confiscate whatever treasures were pilfered. The inventory is always the same. One cracked oil lamp, a string of fake turquoise beads, and a handful of ancient coins that probably belonged to someone's great-great-granduncle. You wonder if, somewhere in the archives, there's a whole drawer labeled Failed Heists, Evidence. Sometimes, the guards go a step further and demand the looter recite a curse of his own invention. The more creative, the better. May your sandals never fit and your dates always be sour. May the Nile flood your garden and your cat sleep on your face forever. After a few lines, everyone starts to enjoy themselves a little too much, and you suspect half the curses get reused at family gatherings. Of course, not every looter is a seasoned criminal mastermind. Some are just unlucky neighbours or overly curious cousins who wandered in by accident. There's a certain type of round-faced, wide-eyed visitor who claims they were looking for the market, and you can tell by the way they avoid eye contact that they've already made mental notes about where the best jars are hidden. The guards, who have seen it all before, are usually willing to let these amateurs go with little more than a warning and a healthy dose of humiliation. Then there are the pros, the infamous, mysterious tomb robbers who supposedly have a network of secret tunnels, password systems, and enough amulets to outfit a small army. Everyone's heard tales about these shadowy figures, but the reality is almost always less impressive. When caught, The mastermind is usually covered in dust, missing at least one shoe, and inventing excuses at lightning speed. "I was just checking the airflow," he might say, while clutching a handful of gold-plated falcon statues. Security inspection, very official. The real winners of the roundup, though, are the guards themselves. Every arrest is another story for the lunch break, another feather in their headdress. Remember the guy with the honey jars? The one who tried to hide in the pottery room? Even the priests get in on the fun, claiming credit for any particularly unlucky thief as proof their curses really work. The scribe makes careful notes in his records. Attempted heist. Pants lost. Dignity unrecoverable. By sunset, order is restored, the looter limps home to rethink his life choices, and everyone goes back to pretending they didn't just witness ancient justice in action. You, for your part, are grateful not to be the star of today's lesson. In the end, the tomb's treasures remain mostly untouched, not because the security is flawless, but because word gets around. In ancient Egypt, the real deterrent isn't a curse or a swinging blade. It's the thought of walking home without your trousers, with 100 beetles as your only witnesses. You get a sneak peek at the afterlife paperwork. If your heart is lighter than a feather, you're good. If not, a crocodile-headed god gets snack time. No pressure. It's not enough to survive the daily grind of tomb building, dodging booby traps, collapsing ceilings, and the occasional rogue scarab. In ancient Egypt, you also have to prepare for the ultimate job review, the heart-weighing ceremony. Forget yearly performance evaluations. This one determines your eternal vacation package. And the paperwork? It's metaphorical, but still terrifying. You hear the priests whisper about it during lunch, speaking in hushed tones as they sprinkle more sand on their bread for luck. When you die, eventually, and hopefully not today, your soul will be called before Osiris, the god of the afterlife, who is kind of like the world's most intimidating customs officer. Your heart is plucked out. Don't ask how. It's a spiritual thing, and placed on a scale right next to the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. The whole thing is presided over by a panel of gods, scribes, and at least one over-enthusiastic jackal-headed security guard. If your heart is lighter than the feather, congratulations. You're admitted to the field of reeds, the afterlife's finest luxury resort. All the onions you can eat, no cursed scarabs in your sandals, and endless days spent relaxing by the celestial Nile. You get your own plot of land, your own personal cow, and not a single foreman in sight. It's the kind of retirement plan that makes you wonder if you should have been nicer to your neighbor's cat. But if your heart is heavier, maybe weighed down by a few borrowed honey jars or some unfortunate comments about the foreman's hat, things get complicated. Waiting nearby is Amit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, and entirely done with your excuses. If your heart tips the scale in the wrong direction, Amit gets to eat it. That's it. No appeals, no do-overs, just an eternity as a cautionary tale for future generations. You disappear from existence, which is an extreme way to dodge family reunions. You wonder sometimes how accurate this whole system is. What if you're mostly good, but once snapped at a co-worker for tracking sand into your lunch? Are there extra points for mummifying your mother-in-law's cat? What if your heart is exactly the same weight as the feather? Is there a tiebreaker? Or do you just have to arm wrestle Anubis? To prepare, the priests offer a bewildering array of spiritual insurance policies. You can purchase little heart-shaped amulets, recite daily spells, or hire a scribe to write flattering stories about your character, just in case Osiris is a sucker for a good reference letter. Some people swear by special diets. Eat more lentils, an elder tells you, keeps the heart light. Others recommend random acts of kindness. Let your neighbor borrow your reed mat, unless he's a known tomb robber. As the day of your final reckoning inches ever closer, hopefully decades away, you find yourself keeping mental lists, good deeds, bad jokes, regrettable comments about the sacred ibis. You imagine showing up at the afterlife gates, nervously clutching your spiritual resume and hoping Osiris is in a forgiving mood. You hear stories of the judges, 42 of them, who will each ask you a question. Did you lie? Did you steal? Did you complain about the incense one too many times? You practice your answers just in case. I always helped sweep up. I never stole more than my share of onions. I only cursed when the ceiling actually fell. Maybe, with luck and a light enough heart, you'll pass. If not, well, you've heard Amit prefers hearts with a hint of garlic, and you've always been more of a honey fan. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife is just one more bureaucratic adventure, but with better snacks and a crocodile-headed auditor. So tonight, as you count your blessings and your onions, maybe try a little kindness. You never know who's keeping score. On the last day, you help slide the massive door into place. Someone makes a joke about locking themselves in. Everyone laughs, but it's a little too nervous to be convincing. It's the final ritual of a years-long project, a moment both triumphant and deeply unsettling. All the sweat, bruises, and questionable lunch breaks have led to this. The sealing of the pharaoh's tomb, that ultimate act of no take-backs. The air is thick with incense, dust, and the collective realization that if anything is left inside, it's not coming out again until future archaeologists show up with better tools and fewer superstitions. The stone door itself is a masterpiece. Dozens of workers spent weeks carving it to perfectly fit the opening. Some say it weighs as much as a small pyramid, though you suspect that's just the foreman's way of discouraging last-minute "oops, I forgot my tool" moments. On the final day, the entire crew lines up, every muscle tensed, every hand braced against the cool, unyielding stone. With a collective push, the door grinds forward, inch by inch, its movement echoing through the empty chambers like the world's slowest drum roll. Someone always cracks a joke, hope nobody's still inside. The laughter is quick, high-pitched, and fades a little too fast. You remember stories of unlucky workers getting stuck for hours or, depending on who's telling it, entire lifetimes. You double-check the roll call, just in case. It wouldn't be the first time someone's just taking a nap turned into a new family legend. There's a certain ceremony to the closing. The priests gather, chanting their final blessings and sprinkling the last handfuls of sacred sand. The scribe records the event, his reed pen scratching out the official note. This day, under the reign of Pharaoh, the tomb is sealed. May no mortal hand disturb its peace. You look around and realize that, for the first time, the tomb feels less like a construction site and more like a secret, heavy with history and the nervous energy of a dozen men who'd all rather be somewhere else. Rolling the stone into place is harder than you imagine. Sweat beads on your forehead, your muscles strain, and the whole crew moves in awkward sync, guided by a supervisor with the motivational style of an angry hippo. Keep it steady, don't wedge your foot. The stone lurches forward with a thunderous boom, dust billowing into your eyes and mouth. The air goes still. The entrance, once alive with voices, jokes, and the clatter of tools, is now silent, cold, and sealed for the ages. Tradition says someone should mark the spot, a splash of paint, a special amulet, a slightly ominous inscription, "Here ends the journey. Enter only if you're really, really sure." The foreman, superstitious to the end, tosses a handful of onions at the base of the stone for luck. The priests mutter one last warning about curses, and the workers exchange glances that say, "I hope that's just for the robbers." And then comes the ceremonial losing of the key. In truth, there isn't an actual key, just a heavy stone block, a pile of sand, and a lot of hope that nobody remembers which slab is which. The oldest worker always swears he'll remember, but everyone knows by tomorrow he'll be back at the river telling stories about the time he nearly got stuck inside. After the door is sealed, the mood shifts. There's pride, of course. This tomb will last forever, or at least until the next dynasty wants to remodel. But there's also relief. You're done. No more traps to reset, no more curses to worry about, no more beetles in your sandals, well, fewer anyway. You brush the dust from your tunic, gather your tools and walk away, glancing back only once to see the sunlight fade from the entrance. By sunset, the crew has scattered. The tomb is now a sealed secret, waiting for eternity, or for a very confused archaeologist with a chisel. As you leave, you whisper a quick farewell to the pharaoh and to the generations who will wonder what it was like to roll the final stone into place. And somewhere in the hush of the desert, a rumor begins. They say you can still hear the laughter if you listen closely. You spot ancient "Kilroy was here" style graffiti. Turns out, even 30 years ago, someone was scratching rude cartoons on the walls and blaming it on the Greeks. It's a discovery as old as the tomb itself. Tucked between the official hieroglyphs about the pharaoh's conquests and the ritual warnings about curses and crocodiles, there's a tiny, slightly off-kilter drawing of a stick figure with a suspiciously large nose. Next to it, the world's oldest signature. Mena was here. Someone's added a cat chasing a duck. Nearby, another message in slightly wobbly script. Nebet did this. If you can read it, you're too close. You might think ancient Egypt was all solemn priests, gold, and deathly silence. But spend a little time in a royal tomb, and you'll realize it's more like a very exclusive public restroom, every surface just begging for a doodle. Tomb workers, guards, passing traders, even the occasional visiting dignitary, all left their mark. Not just serious prayers or warnings, but quick sketches, jokes, and complaints about the foreman. "Hate the night shift," one reads. "Food cold again," says another, right above a crude drawing of what is, apparently, the world's oldest fish sandwich. And then there's the early tourist graffiti. As soon as the paint was dry, people started sneaking in, traders, scribes, even bored teenagers from the next village over. Everyone wanted proof they'd visited the latest marvel. Some wrote their names, others left subtle messages for friends. "Meet me at the market, after the curse wears off." The bravest carved their own hieroglyphic puns, which, judging by the number of groans they still get from modern scholars, haven't aged a day. Blaming the Greeks became a favourite pastime once visitors from the Mediterranean started poking around. "Done by a Greek" is scrawled under a particularly lopsided lion. You suspect it was just a way to avoid punishment for defacing sacred art. But it also has a certain international flavour. The pharaohs wanted to be remembered forever, but so did their prankster neighbours. It wasn't just words, either. There are stick figure races up and down the hallway, an elaborate game board scratched behind a false door, and, right next to the entrance, a drawing of a guard with impressively large ears and the label, "He never hears you coming." Even the priests got in on the action, sometimes leaving secret marks of their own, like an upside-down ankh or a tiny, frowning ibis. Superstition and humour, side by side. Of course, there were rules, or, more accurately, traditions. Official art was off-limits. But the unused corners, the dark back hallways and the sides of pillars, fair game. You find little tally marks counting lunch breaks. And next to the embalming chamber, a list of "people who owe me a loaf of bread," the ancient equivalent of a group chat. Only much harder to delete. Graffiti became a way to prove you existed, even if only for a day. There's something comforting about seeing that signature from centuries ago, knowing that someone else once stood exactly where you are now, bored out of their mind, and decided to make a mark. The tomb, for all its solemnity, is filled with echoes, not just of royalty and rituals, but of real people and their everyday jokes. Somewhere, a guard pretends not to notice as another worker adds a new cartoon to the wall. You can almost hear him mutter, "Just don't blame the Greeks this time." And as you brush dust from your hands and move on, you can't help but add a little something of your own. A barely there doodle, a harmless signature. Maybe someone, thousands of years from now, will find it, smile, and wonder who you were. In the end, history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about the little things. A scrawled joke, a shared complaint, a secret message left for the next poor soul on the night shift. In ancient Egypt, everyone was a tourist eventually, and everyone, it seems, wanted to say, "I was here." You realize the real booby trap is the Nile itself, one bad season, and the lower chambers fill with water, mud, and a family of eels. Suddenly, mummification seems almost cozy. You always thought the tomb's greatest dangers were curses, swinging blades, and the possibility of being outwitted by a particularly clever scarab. But nothing matches the slow, unstoppable menace of a Nile flood. Every year, like clockwork, the river rises, sometimes just enough to water the fields, sometimes enough to convince you that the afterlife starts in the basement. The first warning is a faint, earthy smell wafting through the corridors. The air gets thicker. The stone under your feet feels colder, damper, as if the tomb itself is exhaling. It starts with a trickle, just a little puddle near the lowest step, easy enough to ignore. You tell yourself it's nothing. But by morning, your harmless puddle has become a meandering stream, winding its way around jars of grain and stacks of empty baskets. The scarabs are delighted. You, less so. Soon, the engineers are called in, waving their arms and looking far too pleased with themselves. All part of the grand design, they claim, as they try to reroute the river with nothing but sandbags and prayers. You suspect the river isn't impressed. Neither are the eels, who have decided the burial chamber is now prime real estate. You spot one poking its head out of a crack in the wall, eyeing you with that ancient, slightly judgmental expression only eels seem to have. Nice tomb, it seems to say. Shame about the water damage. By noon, everyone's on flood detail. Workers grab reed mats, buckets, and, for reasons no one will explain, a flock of ducks who are supposed to calm the waters. The ducks ignore the water and immediately chase after the nearest breadcrumb. The priests wade in to sprinkle more incense, chanting at the river to return to its boundaries. The river, as usual, does not listen. You suspect it never will. You develop a new routine, check the chambers for water, shoo out any aquatic squatters, and move the more valuable goods to higher shelves. There's a strange camaraderie that grows out of these flood seasons. Everyone is equally wet, muddy, and irritable. Someone inevitably loses a sandal, and the rest of the shift is spent fishing for it in knee-deep silt. One particularly unlucky scribe nearly falls into a hidden pit now brimming with what can only be described as eel soup. You pull him out, slightly slimier than before, and vow never to tell anyone what you found clinging to his sleeve. Of course, every disaster inspires a new round of improvements. The engineers propose elaborate drainage channels, at least one of which leads directly to the foreman's lunch spot. Someone builds a small raft, just in case. A few optimistic workers suggest teaching the eels to guard the tomb, but after an eel steals the foreman's ring, the idea is quickly abandoned. By the end of the flood, you realize the Nile is the true architect here. All the careful planning, all the booby traps and curses, pale in comparison to nature's slow, soggy advance. The lower chambers are a mess of mud, water, and drifting offerings. There's a new respect for the priests who insist on placing statues of crocodiles and hippos by the door. If nothing else, it keeps the eels guessing. Cleanup takes days. Your feet are permanently pruny, your tools rusted, and the only thing that survived unscathed are the onions. Apparently they float. The tomb is quieter, emptier, a little cleaner, in a way only a major flood can achieve. You breathe in, catch a hint of fresh river air, and for a moment, the afterlife doesn't seem so far away. So you mop, you curse, you slip, you laugh, you marvel at the ingenuity of your fellow workers and the sheer stubbornness of the Nile. In the end, every tomb has two keepers, the builders and the river, and in a bad flood year, you're just along for the ride. By the time you're old, you're telling new workers about man-eating statues, vengeful mummies, and the time you definitely, absolutely saw a ghost. No one believes you, but the stories keep getting better and scarier every year. It starts with a little harmless exaggeration. Maybe the pit trap was only 3 feet deep, but it felt like you were dangling over a bottomless abyss. The statue that once blocked your path didn't actually move, but didn't it look just a little different every time you turned around? And that shadow you saw darting down the hall, well, there's no harm in saying it had glowing eyes and a thirst for souls. The new guys listen, wide-eyed and a little pale, but you notice they carry an extra amulet or two the next day, just in case. The truth is, after a lifetime in the tomb business, your memory gets creative. Details blur, facts turn into fables, and ordinary mishaps grow into legendary disasters. Did the ceiling really collapse 3 times in 1 month, or just once, loud enough to last in memory forever? Did you rescue the foreman from a pit full of snakes, or was it just a nest of very angry eels? Doesn't matter. With every retelling, the story improves. Your audience, armed with fresh chisels and cleaner sandals, hangs on your every word. Even the priests linger at the edge of the group, eager for new curses to add to their collection. Soon, your tales become tradition. Every lunch break, a new generation gathers for the story of the Scorpion Door, the Great Beetle Stampede, or the classic, the Haunted Sarcophagus. You embellish as needed. Maybe the sarcophagus really did rattle at midnight, and maybe the beetles really did march in perfect formation straight into the lunchroom. You describe the foreman's face, a mixture of awe, terror, and the distinct regret of someone who just lost his bread roll to a swarm of insects. It's comedy and horror, all wrapped into one. Sometimes, the stories aren't even yours. You borrow from the old-timers before you, mix in a dash of priestly gossip, and throw in a neighbor's dream about singing mummies. Every legend needs a chorus, after all. The best tales involve something only half explained. A locked room that never opens, a draft that always smells like onions, a secret passage that leads exactly where you don't want to go. The mysteries get bigger, the explanations get thinner, and everyone agrees. Must have been the gods. Of course, there's always that one new worker who's skeptical. He rolls his eyes, scoffs at your warnings, and laughs at the idea of a vengeful mummy. You watch, bemused, as he spends his first night shift alone in the embalming room, returning the next morning jumpier, dustier, and less inclined to mock the wind that sounds like whispering. Sometimes, the tomb itself helps you out with a conveniently timed breeze, or an unexplained rattle in the walls. You nod sagely and let the legend do the rest. As the years pass, your stories outlive your actual muscles. You can barely swing a pickaxe, but your words fill the chambers, lingering long after the torches have gone out. The tomb becomes more than just a resting place for the pharaoh. It's a living, shifting world of shared fears and secret jokes, a place where reality and imagination dig in side by side. By the time you retire, you've created a whole pantheon of original monsters and mishaps. The new crew still shuffles nervously past the painted doors, throws a wary glance at every shadow, and no matter how much they claim not to believe, always shake out their sandals before putting them on. In ancient Egypt, legends aren't just for pharaohs. They're the invisible walls that make every echo a little louder, every silence a little deeper, and every midnight shift just a touch more exciting. Because in the end, the wildest trap is the one you build in someone else's imagination, and with the right story, a tomb can live forever. It's midday and you're hungry. Unfortunately, your lunch break happens inside a half-finished burial chamber, surrounded by suspiciously damp walls and at least 3 different types of beetle snacks, 2 intentional, 1 accidental. Your co-worker pulls out a roasted duck leg that spent the last 2 hours marinating in tomb air and pure existential dread. The crunch? Let's just say it's not all from the spices. Tomb lunch is a special kind of gamble. You start with good intentions. A simple basket of bread, a wedge of goat cheese, maybe a slice of dried fig if you're feeling lucky. But no matter how carefully you wrap it in linen, by the time the lunch bell echoes through the stone corridors, your meal has acquired the delicate aroma of limestone, sweat, and that ever-present bouquet known as ancient mysteries. You take a hopeful bite and instantly regret it. The cheese has developed a new flavor, something between aromatic and please double-check this is actually cheese. Around you, the crew opens their lunch bundles with varying degrees of enthusiasm. One guy cheerfully pops a handful of roasted locusts. Extra protein, he claims, winking. Another unwraps a palm leaf parcel of onions and salted fish, managing to clear a 10-foot radius in seconds. The bravest souls try the tomb's house specialty, beetle fritters, lightly seasoned and only occasionally still moving. You remind yourself it's a delicacy, at least, that's what the foreman says, and you don't want to argue with a man who eats onions like apples. There's no such thing as a relaxing lunch in the tomb. For starters, you have to guard your meal like it's royal treasure. Scarabs are relentless. They swarm at the faintest whiff of honey or bread, crawling out of every crack and crevice to claim their share. You spend half your break shooing them away, the other half hoping nothing important crawled into your basket when you weren't looking. The priests insist the beetles are sacred. You suspect they're just hungry. Even the act of sitting is a test of nerves. The best spot, nearest the shaft of sunlight and farthest from last night's mysterious puddle, is always claimed by the fastest eater. Everyone else lines up along damp walls, balancing on overturned baskets, trying to avoid the drip-drip of condensation from the ceiling. One unlucky apprentice sits down with a sigh, right into a puddle of something green and unidentifiable. Nobody offers to trade seats. Midway through your meal, you realize the tomb's acoustics turn every crunch, slurp, and gag into a public broadcast. Your own attempt at subtle beetle removal is met with a chorus of smothered laughter. Someone's bread roll goes flying, ricocheting off a statue of Anubis, who now looks faintly scandalized. Lunch is as much about survival as sustenance, but every so often there's a moment of camaraderie. Someone shares a handful of dates, another passes around a precious piece of honeycomb. The oldest worker tells a story about the best meal he ever had, which, according to him, involved no insects, no onions, and a view of the Nile at sunset. You all sigh wistfully, then return to your gritty duck legs and cheese that bites back. By the end of the break, you're not exactly satisfied, but you're no longer starving. You've swallowed your daily quota of ancient dust, sampled a new flavor of mystery mold, and survived another lunchtime in the pharaoh's underworld. You pack up your basket, brush the scarabs from your sleeve, and promise yourself a proper meal, someday, somewhere, preferably with fewer beetles. In ancient Egypt, eating lunch in a tomb is less about taste and more about tenacity. The pharaoh may rest in gold and glory, but the worker's true treasure is making it through the midday meal with their dignity and digestive system intact. Just when you think the tomb is finished, in strolls a distant royal aunt and 3 cousins with opinions. Suddenly, the burial chamber needs more gold here, a leopard statue there, and maybe an extra curse for the in-laws. Congratulations, you're now an ancient interior decorator, and the client is immortal and easily offended. You'd hoped that once the final block was placed, your days of chiseling, hauling, and surviving near-miss booby traps would be over. But no, the only thing harder than keeping tomb robbers out is keeping royal relatives happy. The royal family has arrived for what they call a little look around. You soon realize this is code for let's change everything. The cousins are eager, the aunt is unstoppable, and the head priest is already looking for a polite place to faint. The suggestions come quickly and with alarming specificity. Doesn't this chamber feel a little sparse? Auntie Nebbet declares, eyeing the meticulously painted walls like she's appraising a fruit market. She snaps her fingers, and you're ordered to add another row of lotus flowers, this time in blue, not that sad green. The cousins wander off, loudly whispering about how Uncle Pharaoh always wanted a leopard statue, even though everyone knows he was allergic. Soon you're hauling in a half-ton feline sculpture, watching as it's positioned, rotated, and re-rotated for better chi. Then comes the gold. Not enough on the sarcophagus, not enough on the door, not enough on the gold. Can't you make it shinier? One cousin asks, peering critically at a chest of treasures that would blind a desert sun. You spend the afternoon polishing, buffing, and strategically hiding less sparkly items behind mounds of honey jars. Of course, every royal relative has strong feelings about curses. One is never enough, Auntie Nebbit insists. Especially with my in-laws. She consults the priests, who gleefully produce scrolls filled with extra options. Would she prefer a plague of sneezing? Or perhaps something involving eternal itchiness? The relatives vote for both. You watch as the scribe squeezes an extra line of hieroglyphs between "May you be devoured by crocodiles" and "May your bread always be stale." The scribe mutters, "This is getting a bit crowded." But no one listens. Nothing escapes scrutiny. "Is this the good resin?" a cousin asks, poking suspiciously at the mummy wrappings. "That's not the colour I'd have picked for the canopic jars," says another, as if you can just repaint a god's face on a whim. You fetch, you rearrange, you repaint. You smile politely, even as you wonder if it's too late to join the pyramid construction team across the river. At least their pharaoh's family lives in a different city. Each change, of course, requires approval. The cousins gather in the middle of the chamber, arms crossed, lips pursed. The aunt circles the sarcophagus 3 times before nodding her blessing. Every decision is revisited, debated, and often reversed. You marvel at the ancient Egyptian ability to turn even the afterlife into a committee project. By sunset, you're exhausted, flecked with gold dust, and considering writing your own curse. Something about relatives who offer advice unasked. The tomb, which once felt solemn and eternal, now looks like a cross between a bazaar and a very expensive petting zoo. The cousins finally leave, waving and congratulating themselves on their excellent taste. You and the crew collapse against a wall, swapping stories about that time the royal nephew wanted matching sphinxes. The head priest offers incense for patience in the face of unreasonable demands. The scribe quietly doodles a tiny, angry aunt in the margin of his record scroll. As night falls and the tomb finally quiets, you look around at the golden chaos and realize one truth. In ancient Egypt, even the pharaoh's resting place isn't safe from family drama. The afterlife, it seems, is eternal, but so are last-minute redecorations. Torches flicker and shadows dance. You're tasked with lighting the tomb, but every lamp smokes like it's been cursed by a chain-smoking crocodile. Oil spills everywhere, and the only thing spookier than the darkness is the smell of burning goose fat. The afterlife may be eternal, but these lamps barely last till supper. As a humble tomb worker, you dreamed of a prestigious job, maybe carving hieroglyphs, maybe hauling a golden statue, or at least getting to carry the pharaoh's lunch. What you didn't imagine was spending hours hunched over ancient oil lamps, coaxing a sputtering flame from a handful of reeds and a puddle of goose grease. "You have a steady hand," the foreman says. More likely, you just drew the short straw. The ancient Egyptian lamp is a marvel of its time, by which we mean it was probably considered high-tech back when pyramids were a novelty. Shaped like a tiny, leaky boat, it holds a splash of oil and a wick that refuses to cooperate. Fill it too full, and oil runs down your arm and onto your only clean tunic. Fill it too little, and the flame dies with a sigh, plunging you and your co-workers into the sort of darkness that makes you reconsider every story you've ever heard about haunted tombs. And the smoke. With every flicker, it belches thick, greasy clouds that cling to your hair, your lungs, and every surface within a 10-cubit radius. It's a scent you'll never forget. Equal parts old cooking fire, lost hopes, and very confused waterfowl. The goose fat is supposed to be an improvement. Cheaper, more plentiful, locally sourced, but it's also more likely to spatter, sputter, and go out entirely if someone sneezes in the next chamber. Lighting the tomb isn't just a chore, it's a game of strategy and nerves. Where do you put the lamps so the light reaches the most dangerous corners, but doesn't set the linen wrappings on fire? How do you keep the scarabs out of the oil? Answer: you don't. How do you stop the youngest apprentice from using the lamp as a snack warmer? These are the burning questions of your shift, pun very much intended. Every so often, a gust of wind sweeps through the corridors and half the flames gutter out. You dash from room to room, relighting lamps, muttering oaths, and promising the gods you'll never grumble about the sun again. Meanwhile, shadows dance along the walls, stretching and shrinking in eerie patterns. One minute you're sure you see a painted pharaoh wink at you. The next, you're fairly certain Bastet herself just rolled her eyes from the nearest pillar. The darkness is its own kind of enemy. The priests say the tomb should be a place of peace, but after a few hours working by lamplight, you start to suspect peaceful is just another word for mysteriously unsettling. Strange noises seem louder when you can't see the source. Your co-workers' jokes become more nervous. Someone claims to have seen a ghostly cat flicker in the lamplight. You all laugh, too loudly, too quickly. Of course, not every lamp makes it to the end of the day. By supper, you've lost at least 2 to clumsy elbows, 1 to a wayward beetle, and another to an accidental collision with a very annoyed cousin. Oil puddles map the tomb floor like a series of small, treacherous lakes. More than once, you slip and catch yourself on a wall just in time, earning a fresh coat of soot and a new appreciation for the builders who worked by daylight. Eventually, the lamps burn out, one by one, leaving behind a maze of smouldering wicks and half-lit mysteries. You gather what's left, clean the soot from your hands, and squint at the smoky air. You wonder if, in the afterlife, the pharaoh's spirit ever wishes for a brighter bulb. In ancient Egypt, darkness is always one flickering lamp away. And if you ever doubted it, just ask your nose. Nothing says eternity like the scent of burning goose fat. You're minding your own business, carving hieroglyphs about eternal peace, when you notice your chisel is vibrating. You look down to see a cobra coiled next to your lunch. Ancient Egypt, where take your kid to work day sometimes means take your snake to the afterlife day. You try not to panic, but you do anyway. Wildlife in the tomb is just part of the scenery. At least, that's what you tell yourself every morning as you triple-check your sandals before putting them on. Most days, the closest you get to danger is a beetle in your bread or a gecko watching you from a wall niche. But every now and then, you get the real stars of the animal kingdom. The slitherers, the biters, the creatures with more venom than the average family reunion. The first time it happens, you think you're imagining things. Maybe it's the heat. Maybe you've been squinting at hieroglyphs too long. But no, that's definitely a snake, definitely alive, and definitely sizing up your roasted onions. You freeze. You try to recall what the priests said about animal omens. Was a cobra a sign of good fortune, or just the gods reminding you to check your seat before sitting? Too late now. Snakes have a way of turning an ordinary workday into an impromptu test of agility. 1 minute, you're methodically scraping at the wall. The next, you're holding perfectly still, silently pleading with the universe that your lunch is more appealing than your ankles. The foreman spots the snake and, rather than springing into action, immediately launches into his favorite story about the time he faced down 3 vipers with nothing but a broom and a half-eaten pomegranate. Meanwhile, you're left as the demonstration. Word spreads quickly. Soon you've got an audience, a couple of guards, 2 priests, a scribe who's pretending to take notes but is really just here for the drama. The priests argue over whether to chase the snake away or leave it as a protective spirit. The guard offers to fetch a stick, an impressively short one. In the end, it's usually the snake that decides when the show is over, gliding off into a crack in the stone, leaving behind a trail of nerves and 1 slightly squashed onion. Cobras are the most famous, but they're not the only wildlife guests. Sometimes you find a lizard curled up under a basket, or a fat frog making itself at home in the water jar. On a particularly unlucky day, a mongoose dashes through the corridor, right after the snake, both vanishing in opposite directions, presumably to file workplace complaints. The priests insist every creature in the tomb has a symbolic meaning: rebirth, protection, or, occasionally, don't eat anything you can't identify. Lunch breaks become tactical operations. You scan the area for movement, shake out your mat, and pick your spot carefully. Your friends joke that you eat faster than anyone in Egypt. You assure them it's all about efficiency, not terror, but nobody buys it. You develop a keen ear for hissing, rustling, and the soft, unmistakable sound of something slithering in the shadows. Even the scarabs keep their distance when a snake is in town. Of course, there are stories, so many stories. The engineer who claimed a serpent whispered building secrets in his ear. The scribe who swears he once saw a snake wearing a tiny, golden amulet. The priest who insists he trained a cobra to bow every time a royal relative entered the tomb. Nobody believes this one, but it's retold every week. With each tale, the snakes get a little bigger, the escapes more daring, and the audience a little more jumpy. At the end of the day, you survive your encounter, though your appetite for onions takes a hit. You chalk it up to another lesson learned in ancient Egypt. Some days you're the builder, some days you're the snack. You brush off your tunic, pack up your tools, and walk home with a story you'll tell for years, preferably from a safe, snake-free distance. In the afterlife, they promise eternal peace. Until then, watch your step. There's always another snake in the shadows, ready to remind you who the tomb really belongs to. So tonight, as you stretch out in your perfectly not-haunted bed, surrounded by soft sheets and zero-scarab beetles, maybe spare a moment for the souls of ancient Egypt, the stone carvers, the torchbearers, the trap-setters, and even the poor intern who accidentally sealed himself inside. For them, a bad day at work meant dodging falling rocks, deciphering ancient passwords, or wondering if their next step would set off a 2-0-year-old booby trap. Your worst Monday probably didn't involve dodging snakes in a corridor or praying that the heart-weighing ceremony wouldn't involve a hungry crocodile god. They endured blistering heat, terrifying curses, endless superstition, and more shifting sand than you'd find in an entire season of reality TV. But through all of it, every late-night shift, every awkward lunch among the mummies, every last-minute redecoration order from a pharaoh's cousin, they built wonders that lasted millennia. They left behind stories, legends, and an entire genre of horror movies. So as you nestle under your duvet, with the distant hum of your fan instead of the rumble of collapsing stone, remember, survival isn't just about luck. It's about stubbornness, teamwork, and the universal human talent for making bad situations much, much funnier in hindsight. Let your worries drift away like desert sand and give yourself permission to rest easy. After all, the only curse you're likely to encounter tonight is the one on your phone battery. History may be terrifying, gross, and occasionally fatal, but it's also a reminder that people, ancient or modern, are really, truly, impressively ridiculous. Good night, sleep well, and may your dreams be free of trapdoors and judgmental scarabs.